Epsilon Omega. For organizing this tribute to Aunt Vivian Johnson Cook. Almost a half century ago in Memphis, July 26, 1974, 121 family members attended the first Johnson Stafford family reunion. Aunt Vivian, the patriarch of the family, was the main speaker. I want to quote from her presentation, some of the excerpts from her presentation that year. She said, "I can speak knowingly of my mother and father. Let us begin with Spencer Johnson and Caroline Allie Johnson, his wife. They were plain people, the salt of the earth people. They were religious people, church workers. They were deeply interested in education and gave their children every opportunity that they could afford. They were community leaders who worked to improve conditions for themselves and for their fellow citizens. They possessed and exhibited high ideals and standards in life and learning. Mother was a remarkable woman. She fearlessly entered unexpected territories and there made new roads. My father made a rich and lasting contribution to the Memphis community and to the wider sections as well, through his leadership in the founding of Manassas School. He was a civic leader, a church man, a devoted family man, a man of vision, industry, and character. These two early members of our family lived as examples to be followed. They set the tone for the family, end of quote. The pearls of wisdom strung throughout her speech define the principle of Sankofa, retrieving the wisdom of the past and carrying it into the future. Her parents, both formerly enslaved, married April 12, 1868, 3 years after the end of the Civil War. They would have been excited about the promise of the future and ready to unleash the brilliance inherited from unknown African ancestors. Her father, Spencer Thomas Johnson, was born March 28, 1851. He became a landowner and a farmer in Colliersville, Tennessee. Her mother, Caroline Olivia Kate, was born August 1st, 1849, and was the daughter of the slaver Henry Alley. The family moved from Colliersville to Shelby County, a Memphis suburb, when Vivian was 9 years of age. The school, founded by her father in 1899, Manassas School, added 1 grade each year, eventually serving students from grades 1 through 12. It was the first 4-year accredited Negro high school in Shelby County, and by 1924 was the largest Rosenwald school in the nation. Today, Manassas School serves the North Memphis community as a high school. It is still in existence. According to family history, when one of Caroline's half-brothers began school, she was taught to read and write by studying homework assignments with him. When the Civil War ended, she became the first appointed teacher for free Black and the formerly enslaved children and adults in Fayette County. From 1870 through 1874, she was secretary to Bishop Miles, the first bishop for the newly founded Colored Methodist Episcopal Church, now called Christian Methodist Episcopal Church. As secretary, she traveled by horseback as many as 50 miles to complete the minutes of the newly organized CME local units located in West Tennessee and northern Mississippi. Spencer and Caroline were the parents of 10 children, 8 of whom lived to adulthood. They encouraged their 4 sons to be skilled tradesmen, skills that could provide an income to support a family. Several of the sons attended college, but the parents were adamant that their 4 daughters be college educated, guaranteeing they would never work as house servants to white families. Like their mother, they became teachers. They were a family of artists, musicians, writers of plays and movies, dramatists, designers, and poets. Talents and interests that add beauty and meaning to the human experience. Her father died in 1924, and her mother a year later. Now, that was an overview of Vivian's family that informs Vivian's story, the woman we honor this evening. Vivian, whose nickname was Sweet, was born October 6, 1889 in Colliersville, Tennessee, and grew up in the Jim Crow South. 20 years younger than her oldest sibling, her family's legacy was no stranger to her. She knew she stood on some very tall shoulders. She graduated from Lemoyne Normal School in Memphis on May 26, 1908, and entered Howard University that fall, where she was, as the video showed, one of the first members of the newly founded first Black Greek letter organization, AKA sorority. She graduated from Howard in 1912 with a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, and in that same year began her first year of teaching at Tuskegee Institute under the leadership of Booker T. Washington. She also taught at McCall School the following year, which was a private school in Cincinnati. And for 4 years, from 1914, she taught at Sumner School in St. Louis. It was the first school for African Americans west of the Mississippi River. She was introduced to her future husband, Ralph Victor Cook, in 1917. Both were attending summer classes at Columbia University that summer. He with colleagues from Baltimore's Frederick Douglass High School. Vivian earned the degree, Master of Arts in English, in 1918 from Columbia, and she and Ralph Cook were married that same year, that summer, in Memphis, Tennessee. And most likely at the historic Collins Chapel CMA Church, the home church for many Johnson family members. That wedding took place August 22nd, 1918. Vivian relocated from St. Louis to Baltimore after the marriage. As teachers in the Baltimore school system, the couple was tireless in their commitment to nurture the talents of their students. Their only child, Ralph Spencer Cook, born June 2nd, 1919, died before his 6th month. At that July 1974 family reunion, and Vivian didn't speak of her accomplishments, she spoke only of those of her parents. But what a legacy Vivian Elma Johnson Cook left for us to admire, appreciate, and perchance emulate. She was a first in many positions in the Baltimore school system, which will be discussed in more detail by another of the panelists. She was also interested, an art patron, really. And that too will have further discussion by another of the panelists. She was indefatigable in promoting the value of service and education on behalf of her race. And as a result, she received awards from Howard University, the Future Teachers of America, the NAACP, the Urban League, where she had served as a board member. She was very active in the YWCA and served 10 years on the Baltimore Commission on Problems of the Aging. She organized the Baltimore branch of the National Association of College Women in 1924, and in 1933 to 37, she served as the president. Over the course of her lifetime, she became friends with W.E.B. Du Bois. She was known to Howard University President Mordecai Johnson, philosopher Elaine Locke, civil rights lawyer and Associate Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. She had correspondence from Carter G. Woodson, from Mary Church Terrell, and from Ralph Bunche. She was a member of Mary McLeod Bethune's National Council of Negro Women, meeting with Eleanor Roosevelt on several occasions. Her husband, Ralph Victor Cook, died September 4th, 1949, 31 years after their marriage. He would have been her strongest ally. His mother, Helen Appo Cook, had been a leading activist in Washington, D.C., and a charter member of the 1896 National Association of Colored Women. And Vivian began her public school teaching career in 1912, working under the constrictions of the 1896 Supreme Court Plessy versus Ferguson decision that upheld the constitutionality of racial segregation. She retired 2 years after the 1954 Supreme Court Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka decision that rendered unconstitutional the Plessy decision. After this retirement from the public secondary school system in Baltimore, she taught practice student teachers at Morgan State College from 1956 until 1963, those years coinciding with the renewed civil rights struggle in the March on Washington. Her trailblazing career in education and in social events covered 51 years. Albert Einstein wrote, and I quote, "Strange is our situation here upon earth. Each of us comes but for a short time, not knowing why, yet sometimes seeming to divine a purpose." End of quote. And Vivian divined her purpose. She lived and breathed a life of service through her decades of personal involvement in educational, cultural, and social activities. She promoted African-American history. She promoted African-American artists. She spoke up for the rights of Black women. Like her father, Spencer, she founded lasting institutions. Like her mother, Caroline, she fearlessly entered unexpected territories and there made new roads. There is a phrase in our AKA national hymn that speaks to how she lived her life. Quote, "By merit and culture, we strive and we do things that are worthwhile." End of quote. There is a photograph of me and Aunt Vivian on our way to the annual Philomathians Club dinner in 1977. Prior to that shot, we were in her bedroom using an eyebrow pencil to give her that final, beautiful, professional touch. I began this presentation quoting Aunt Vivian's remarks at that 1974 family reunion. I'll end with this Sankofa-like remark from that same speech. Quote, she said, On such occasions as this, it is appropriate to take a glimpse of the past. I form that tie that connects the past with the present, a bond between yesterday and today, end of quote. She was the last of the first generation of children born to the formerly enslaved Johnsons and Alleys. The tie that connected us ended with her death, July 28, 1977, but her legacy did not end. Her life's works endure. Her funeral was held at her church, the Episcopal Church of St. Catherine of Alexandria in Baltimore. I have one last acknowledgement. I want to acknowledge Black women during Women's History Month, this month in the March. And in tribute to the ancestors, I offer words from Vivian's friend, W.E.B. Du Bois, and I quote, "I have known the women of many lands and nations. I have known and seen and lived beside them, but none have I known more sweetly feminine, more unswervingly loyal, more desperately earnest, and more instinctively pure in body and in soul than the daughters of my Black mothers. This, then, a little thing to their memory and inspiration," end of quote.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I was clapping, but I was on mute and you didn't know it. That was absolutely beautiful. Thank you so much, Ms. Morris, for that.
Sir Jen, if I could just add for people who don't know, Margaret Johnson Morris is the great niece of Vivian Johnson Cook. And it was wonderful for me to get connected with her. Beverly Lawler, I think, is on as well. I heard her earlier. She is the, if I'm correct, great niece of Vivian Cook. There are other members of the Johnson family on this evening, and I was lucky enough to connect with Beverly Lawler, who then connected me with Margaret Johnson Morrison, and that's how we were able to connect. And Margaret Johnson Morrison, in her own right, is an activist. There's a movie out called Resisterhood, if people haven't had a chance to see it, where she talks about the need for people of color to go out there and vote. So I just wanted to make those comments as well.
I am on. I just wanted to make, this is Beverly Lawler, and I am on. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for everything, Beverly.
You're welcome.
All right. Janet, you're on mute.
Thank you again, Ms. Morrison, and thank you. I'm glad you were able to join us, Ms. Lawler. This has been a beautiful presentation. It really has taken my breath away. We would like to go on now, and I would like to introduce Margaret Morrison. Ms. Morrison is going to discuss her I would like to introduce Jean Tucker Mann, and who will talk about her connection with Mrs. Cook and the Philomathians and other memories that she possibly has, because I'm sure that anyone who knew her intimately has many wonderful memories, as we have just heard. So thank you again, Ms. Morrison, and welcome, Ms. Mann.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Good evening. I'm so pleased at this opportunity to represent the Philomathians at this event to honor Mrs. Vivian Johnson Cook, one of our founders. It also gives me great pleasure to share my personal memories of Mrs. Cook. She had a profound impact on my life. As we all know, in 1932, in the United States of America, segregation and racial oppression prevailed, and African Americans who were culturally described as colored people were denied so many of the societal privileges we enjoy today. We were denied entrance to most venues and therefore propelled to create our own sources of social and cultural enrichment. Assessing the era, Vivian Johnson Cook and Vashti Turley Murphy, two visionary, erudite educators, were aware of the many sororities, social, civic, and service groups that existed in the area. But they did not see a purely intellectual group whose mission was devoted entirely to learning. Each saw a need for creative intellectual avenues and stimulation among Black women. Both women were graduates of Howard University and committed to high educational standards and career development. Recognizing the need of this level of intellectual and stimulating learning for Black women, Vivian Cook and Vashti Murphy called together a group of highly educated women with recognizable standing in the community and established two original goals: to study modern trends and to discover what other Black women were accomplishing in their cities, states, the nation, and even in the world. 12 outstanding women responded to Mrs. Cook and Mrs. Murphy and became charter members of a newly organized group. Mrs. Joshua Maxwell, a charter member, suggested the name Philomathians, a word derived from two Greek words meaning lovers of learning. The name was accepted and has remained intact for more than 90 years. Interestingly, both of the founders declined the presidency of the organization. The unanimous choice for this office was Mrs. William C. McCain, who held the presidential post for 15 years. Today, in 2023, the Philomathians is a study and advocacy group currently comprised of 21 professional African American women. Members study pertinent issues and modern trends affecting women and the broader community and engage in profound and relevant discussions regarding the possibilities and challenges women face in building their careers. Current organizational goals include encouraging a lifelong interest in learning, participating in the cultural and intellectual life of the community, and honoring women of all ages who have made significant impact in the local, state, national, and international community. Our monthly meetings are enhanced by presenters across a wide spectrum of professional fields and vocations that include health and educational systems, the corporate world, ministerial, political and legal fields, financial and economic systems, and artistic and literary arenas. We have been honored to include among our presenters women who hold high rank in the military. Our meetings have continued even during the COVID crisis. We're very fortunate our president, Sherry Larkins, has the technological skill that enables us to meet virtually and enjoy presentations from guest speakers across the country. For 91 years, active and honorary members of the Philomathians have enthusiastically upheld the ideals of the organization set forth by our founders, Vivian Johnson Cook and Vashti Turley Murphy. We plan to continue highlighting their legacy by the exemplification of the name of our organization, Lovers of Learning. I had no idea when I walked the halls as a student of Dunbar Senior High School, where Vivian Johnson Cook was principal, that she would have such a profound impact in my life. I remember her as a tall, quiet, poised, no-nonsense administrator who could shift in a heartbeat from a strict disciplinarian to a kind, compassionate leader of young people. She always addressed girls as young women and boys as young men. I never heard her raise her voice in anger or frustration, and she only had to make an appearance to bring a hush over an auditorium filled with rambunctious, noisy teenagers, or a hallway dominated by raucous, sometimes physically aggressive young men. She just had to make her presence known to gain the respect and admiration of the young people for whom she had responsibility. I graduated from high school in 1954, when the US Supreme Court ruled unanimously that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. Brown versus the Board of Education. Several of my teachers and my school principal, Mrs. Cook, the Philomathian founder we honor today, encouraged me to apply to attend Towson State College, fall of 1954. I applied, and just prior to graduation, received a letter of admission. You can imagine how elated my parents and I were, along with my teachers and my principal, Mrs. Cook. When I received no further information from Towson and my friends were receiving directions about enrollment in the colleges they had chosen to attend, I began calling Towson for instructions about my enrollment. After several unsuccessful attempts to reach the Dean of Admissions, whose signature was on the letter I received, he was always in a meeting, I received a letter from the dean's office requesting my parents and me to attend an afternoon meeting at Towson. It was a very awkward meeting as the dean stammered and stuttered through an explanation of the reason the letter of admission I received would not be honored. My mother, always a straightforward, no-nonsense woman, said very quietly, "What you're saying is my daughter cannot attend this college because she is a Negro." The dean was quick to point out Towson would be accepting applications from Negro students in 1955, and I would be welcome to apply for admission the spring of that year. My parents and I left the meeting, and as we returned home, felt the weight and the pain of disappointment, helplessness, and just plain hurt one feels when victimized by discrimination and segregation. Too late to apply for admission to any other college, and in a state of panic, I contacted Mrs. Cook, explained my dilemma, and asked for her advice. She was livid, but true to her demeanor and character, never raised her voice, and very patiently guided me to consider the option of attending Morgan, Coppin, or Howard, with her assurance that she would make the necessary connections for my late enrollment. My experience at Towson had wounded my self-confidence, and I wanted to remain at home. And I felt the need for the nurturing of a small educational environment. I chose Coppin. Mrs. Cook contacted Dr. Miles Connor, who was president, and 3 weeks after classes started at Coppin, I was admitted in the freshman class. I kept in touch with Mrs. Cook and advised her of my progress at Coppin. I have often wished I could have shared this next story with Mrs. Cook. 1991, I was honored to receive the Distinguished Black Maryland Award from Towson State University, along with Kurt Schmoke, Freeman Rabowski, Joe Haskins, and Nancy Bennett. I was supposed to limit my acceptance remarks to 3 minutes, but I took 10 minutes to tell the story that I recall to you today. I also took the opportunity to address my sons and the rest of the young Black people, in the audience, saying, young people, if you take nothing else from this event today, remember this. 37 years ago, I was turned away from this campus because I was Black. Today, I am honored on this campus because I am Black. Never forget the beauty, strength, endurance, intelligence, and power of your Blackness. I'm confident I'm one of many who can recall the impact Vivian Johnson Cook had on his or her life. Her legacy reflects outstanding contributions in so many aspects of society. I join with all who honor her this day, and deep down in my spirit, I will always remember her as one of those very special persons who helped to shape my life's direction and destiny. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mann. That was some story, I'm telling you. There's so many things in that that I can relate to. But we have got to move on, as wonderful as these stories are. This reminds me of the little kids sitting around the fireplace at the feet of their grandparents, listening to family tales. This is wonderful. Our last but not least speaker is Ms. Jean Thompson. Ms. Thompson is going to talk about her relationship with Ms. Cook in connection with the Baltimore Museum of Art, another place that I have spent quite a bit of time and actually did the year's training to become a docent and did that for a couple of years. So life just kind of seems like it takes you around, and it seems to take you around so many people that you know, but you didn't know. These stories are absolutely wonderful. Ms. Mann, I'm not going to intrude on your time. Ms. Thompson, not going to intrude on your time. We would be happy to hear from you now.
And thank you so much. And thank you to the other speakers, Ms. Morrison, Ms. Tuckerman. My goodness, my heart is so full. I am so honored to be here, and I bring you greetings on behalf of the Joshua Johnson Council of the Baltimore Museum of Art. Some of you know who we are, and some of you may not. The Joshua Johnson Council is now about 37 years old, and it is one of the nation's oldest museum affiliate groups devoted to supporting Black American and Black diaspora artists and art. One of our members here tonight, Norma Scott, was among our earliest members. And hello to you, Norma. Thank you so much for inviting the council to celebrate the legacy of Vivian Johnson Cook. Vivian Cook opened the doors of opportunity and advancement for Baltimore's Black children, for our community, and for Black artists. Her story is one of vision, achievement, and leadership. She worked to ensure that the Black community's creative genius would be represented in the halls of public museums. She understood that this art, in her time as well as ours, embodied and addressed cultural, and historical themes. The fight for equality, expressions of intellectual freedom, calls for social justice, and the brilliance, beauty, and joy of Black people. Through her leadership, Black children in Baltimore would have access to and would benefit from greater exposure to fine art representing our culture and the world's cultures. It is important for us to remember that in her era, educators were respected leaders. And Black women's organizations interacted to form a powerful movement to advance the Black community. Here are just a few highlights about her work. During the 1930s, Mrs. Cook and her peers were organizing exhibitions of artwork by noted Black artists in locations around the city of Baltimore. Black civic organizations, women's groups, and the historically Black colleges sponsored these exhibitions. The Afro newspaper used its own offices to hold a major exhibition. Black high schools and middle schools held significant art exhibitions by well-known artists. The community did for itself and did not wait for the mainstream to do for it. Mrs. Cook and other educators wanted and made every opportunity they could for their students. And we see this in May of 1932, when the Harmon Foundation, a philanthropy based in New York City, brought to Baltimore 42 paintings by Black artists. Now, the Harmon Foundation had originally been inspired by the Harlem Renaissance during the 1920s. Its wealthy benefactor was a real estate investor who supported the arts. And he funded major prizes for Black artists when others would not recognize their work. This new exhibition of works by Black artists arrived in Baltimore. And where did it take place? At Booker T. Washington, where it was seen by 500 children, and then it moved to Dunbar, where it was seen by more families. During the 1930s, the Baltimore Museum of Art formed a committee of the city to advise the museum on developing stronger connections with the public. The committee of the city had an African-American subcommittee. Its prominent members included Vivian Cook and the civil rights activist Lily Mae Jackson. They called on the museum to exhibit works by Black artists. Ms. Cook recommended that the museum reach out to the Black churches and the women's groups and invite them to come to exhibitions and talks and tours. By 1938, the museum began planning an exhibition of works by Black artists, again, with the support of the Harmon Foundation. And in 1939, that February, the result was Contemporary Negro Art, one of the landmark national exhibitions of Black art. Ms. Cook used her platform then to advocate for educational programming and tours in the museum to ensure that Black school groups would see this landmark exhibition. And as you saw in the video, Contemporary Negro Art ran for 2 weeks and attracted 12,000 visitors. Notably, the work of a Baltimore-born artist, Elton Fax, was included in the exhibition. Mrs. Cook's efforts built her relationship with the museum managers, in particular, with a curator named Adeline Briskin, who would later become the director of the BMA. And by the 1940s, Briskin and Ms. Cook were collaborating and planning to acquire artworks by Black artists for the permanent collection of the Baltimore Museum of Art. As you saw, the first in 1940 was a painting by artist Dox Thrash. And I'll read you what the acquisition record says. Quote, presented on behalf of the colored citizens of Baltimore through the offices of the Art Committee of the Women's Cooperative Civic League of Baltimore. The League was a grassroots Black organization of women concerned with far more than art. Its members addressed issues of housing, public health, food purity, refuse disposal, children's well-being, safety, and voting rights. Vivian Cook was the chairwoman of the Art Committee, which had already sponsored several Black art exhibitions in Baltimore. The donors by this also should be noted. They included Augusta Chiselle, who is remembered as one of Baltimore's Black suffragists. I think one of Ms. Giselle's ancestors, descendants is on this call tonight. Hello. Among the donors were the Coppin Teachers College, teachers of the demonstration school, and also Dr. Mason Hawkins, who for many years had been the principal at Douglas. Then in 1944, the Women's Cooperative Civic League voted to buy another painting for the BMA. The museum asked for a work by Jacob Lawrence, and the Women's League raised the money. Ms. Cook went out and looked for the art. It was purchased with the donations of the group in 1946. Around this time, the Harmon Foundation commissioned a Black artist, Laura Wheeler Waring, and a white artist, Betsy Graves Revno, to paint 40 portraits of distinguished Black leaders. The sitters for these paintings included Thurgood Marshall, Mary McLeod Bethune, George Washington Carver, Paul Robeson, and many more. And according to the Smithsonian, where the show opened in May 1944, quote, the resulting exhibition, Portraits of Outstanding Americans of Negro Origin, had the express goal of reversing racial intolerance, ignorance, and bigotry by illustrating the accomplishments of these notable sitters. And it traveled to Baltimore, and who was there? The local sponsor was the Association of Teachers of Colored Schools of Baltimore. And an article in the Afro from that time period suggests that Ms. Cook had a local role in bringing that touring exhibition. 26 of the portraits arrived in Baltimore in 1947. It took place at the Peel Museum downtown near City Hall. In 1948, Vivian Cook was chair of the Public Schools Negro History Week Committee. She and her colleague, the educator Milton Duggar, presented to the Baltimore Museum of Art another painting, an oil painting called Baptism by the Black artist Hayward Bill Rivers. And it was given, quote, on behalf of Black teachers and administrators. As you can see, Mrs. Cook saw her labor in the arts as an educational mission. At the Joshua Johnson Council, our mission echoes hers. Last year, we raised funds and contributed to the purchase of a contemporary artwork by a Black artist who is a MICA alumna. Her name is Akia Brion. It was the 17th purchase of Black art for the BMA's collection by the Joshua Johnson Council. JJC also sponsors internships for young people who seek careers in museum and art fields. We program tours and educational events. We have a live stream talk called JJC Talks, where we interview Black artists from Baltimore. We are in conversation now with a professor at Morgan who wants to build an endowment to help Morgan's art students travel to see major exhibitions and expand their education. I hope that you can see, as I now do, that thanks to all of you, We have learned that Vivian Cook paved the path that Joshua Johnson Council is walking. Our mission was begun really in her time by her. And we are so grateful to you, Sandy, and to your Alpha Kappa Alpha chapter for encouraging us to learn our own history. Thank you very much.
Amazing, amazing. To hear the stories about her, the art going to the school, them taking the art into the high school and into the middle school to educate the students there. I mean, how wonderful would that be if we could do that now, you know? And that just must have been amazing.
Before-
Sandy,
I'm sorry,
some of these
Sandy.
paintings today are worth millions of dollars, and they were hanging on the walls of high schools and middle schools.
Crazy. Wow.
We have one more speaker. And before I introduce that speaker, I would like to say that there will be a Q&A following this session. And I see that we already have over 60 questions or in the chat. But I would ask you to please put your questions in the chat, and we will try to answer as many of them as we can in the time we have left. At this time, I would like to introduce you to our History Committee member and soror, Irene Gillis, who will introduce our final speaker, Dr. Ruth Sheffy.
Good evening. And on behalf of the History Committee of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Epsilon Omega Chapter, I am proud to honor our member, Dr. Ruth T. Sheffy, for her dedication to the education of students in the city of Baltimore. Like Vivian Johnson Cook, Ruth T. Sheffy is a master educator, community leader, member of the Philadelphians, and a member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated Epsilon Omega Chapter. Both members taught English, and both were on staff at Morgan State College, now university. They both also attended Howard University, Dr. Sheffy for her master's degree, and Mrs. Cook for her bachelor's degree. In addition, both worked to promote honoring Blacks, African Americans in the arts. Dr. Sheffy, Black writers, and Mrs. Cook, Black artists. Both Mrs. Cook and Dr. Sheffy inspired their students to love language and literature as they themselves will gladly learn and gladly teach. Thank you.
So we
Thank
don't
you.
actually have Dr. Sheffy on tonight, but we thought in that rivalry to make some comparisons between Vivian Cook and Dr. Sheffy, who is a longtime member of the Epsilon Omega chapter and has so many similarities to Vivian Cook. So we wanted to take time to just make a special recognition to her tonight.
Okay. All right. Again, I would like to say thank you to all of our presenters. Thank you to all of those of you who tuned in. And Sandy, I'm going to let you handle the Q&A.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you very much, Janet. Before we jump to the Q&A, I just wanted to show you the picture that Margaret Morrison was telling us about. I think everybody's probably eager to see that. So I want to show you that picture.
Oh,
Okay.
very nice.
So Margaret, unmute yourself and tell us what that is again.
Right. That was a wonderful evening with my aunt. My husband took this shot. We were leaving her home. Some of her friends were in the background. If I remember correctly, Mr. and Mrs. Daly, D-A-L-Y. And we had just come from Aunt Vivian's bedroom because she said, I think she called me darling that evening. Darling, come and see if my makeup is right. And so we went upstairs and used the eyebrow pencil to just fill in that. And you see how beautiful she looks on this picture. That was in 1977, and she had died of a heart attack a few months later.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, so as Janet said, there are a lot of questions here in the chat. So I'm just gonna sort of jump on the first one I see. Or if somebody wants to put a hand up, they're willing, they're quite willing. Okay, here's a question. What do you think Mrs. Johnson Cook would say about the great achievements the sorority has made as a whole? So who would like to address that one? Margaret, you want to try that one since you're a soror as well?
Well, yes, I believe that she would be pleased with what, number one, not because she's involved as the person we are having the tribute to, but to the sorority as a whole for continuing to value the principles upon which the Epsilon Omega chapter was founded, and prior to that, the undergraduate chapter. It's a rich history, and it deserves to be known, not just to people who are members of the sorority, but for the entire citizenry to understand what it meant for a group of women back in the day during the time of segregation, Jim Crow laws, to invest their time and their energy, educational resources and the cultural backgrounds that they all came from, and produce an outstanding and continuing legacy that will be lasting for as long as there is a United States of America and sororities. And I speak not just because I'm an AKA, but I extend that to other sororities who also are complimenting a woman in her own rights and working for women in their own rights, which is one of what my Aunt Vivian did. So I salute all of us as not just sorority women, but leading the way for others to follow in leadership and service to our communities. And I always have to bring in the voting part, because we can never realize our full potential until we become political activists ourselves and demand what we deserve. And so that's an encouragement. Don't just vote during a presidential election. Vote every time there is an election. Let's move the thing forward.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Message for during Women's History Month as well. And the Resisterhood link is in the chat for anyone who wants to take a look at that. So there's one question here, and I don't know if someone else knows the answer. Does anyone know if Dunbar Junior Senior High School has created an academic scholarship in honor of Vivian Johnson Cook? I am not aware of that.
I'm not aware of it. Even all the time that I was personally in the school system, I was not aware of it. And I don't think it has been done since. In fact, I'm pretty sure it has not.
All right, so most of the other things I see in the chat are just compliments to our speakers. So is there anyone who has any questions? If so, you can raise your hand, or you can drop in the chat, or however you would like to proceed. I can introduce you. Okay, I see a raised hand. Can you unmute yourself, Wenna, and ask your question? Great.
Hi, good evening, ladies. My name is Wenna. Special thank you to the panel and the program committee for putting on a wonderful presentation. I had a question. Do you all happen to know what were some of Ms. Johnson Cook's favorite artists?
Some of her Ms. Thompson.
Jean, we'll turn that one to you.
Thank you. I do not know her personal favorites, but what I do know from the reading that I've done is that she took it upon herself to take under her wing artists who were born and raised in Baltimore and help them find opportunities in their careers so that they could attend college and so that they could get the art training that would advance their opportunities to exhibit. So she was familiar with artists like Doc Thrash. She was familiar with Elton Fax, who taught in the school system and taught at Howard. And she was involved with artists who were at Morgan. But I can't say if, she acquired paintings. I'm looking at the beautiful paintings on Miss Morrison's wall and thinking it must be in your DNA because you have quite a collection there. But that's a wonderful question. Thank you. I don't have specific knowledge about, her own favorite artists.
Sarah Sandy, I'm curious, may I ask a question? I see a number of what I'm going to call young people, because they're certainly younger than I am, but what appear to be still perhaps college students or very newly out of college. And I would just like to know where they heard about this program, if anyone cares to share that, and their reason for being on tonight. The young lady that just spoke, Wenna, would you care to be the first to answer that for me?
Oh, absolutely, Ms. Williams. So I heard about tonight's event from the chapter social media on Instagram.
Oh,
And
okay.
I wanted to hear about one of the great charter members for Epsilon Omega. So I knew I wanted to be here tonight.
Well, thank you. Are you a potential AKA or are you an AKA?
I am not an AKA, ma'am.
Oh, you need to do something about that. I see some other, may I ask Ms. Danielle Davis, young lady down here in the corner, what brought you on this evening?
Sure, and pleasure to hear the young lady. I appreciate that. I also saw it on social media, and because it's Women's History Month, I thought this would be a great opportunity to learn more. And I learned so much tonight, really rich history, especially for Baltimore City.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Finch down here at the bottom, you have been looking smiling all evening. May I ask you how you learned about the program? Lisa Finch, you're on mute.
I'm sorry. So I'm delighted to join all of you this evening. I learned about this through Margaret, one of the presenters,
Oh,
and
okay.
I, along with several of my cousins, are the great nieces and perhaps nephews of Vivian Johnson Cook.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Could
Thank
we
you so
say-
much for coming
So
on.
how many members of the family are on? Do we
I was
know?
going to make a comment. I have seen names of quite a number of the Johnson Alley family members, and I'm so appreciative that you are
Can
here.
we put it in the chat?
Yes, right. Yeah, because
That would be
Lisa, I
great,
see
yes.
her sister Tina is on, and Beverly was on, and Eileen,
Sparkle,
Brown, and Sparkle,
Sylvia, Julie,
there are a lot of us.
Akata.
Oh, wonderful.
Wow.
Yes.
Well, we certainly do appreciate it, and we definitely appreciate all the effort that Sandy put into this and for getting the word out. And we certainly hope that you enjoyed being with us. Thank you again.
And one
you.
other thing, I just saw another name, Demling, or Sterling Stuckey's daughter is on. And if I may speak, someone mentioned the artwork behind me. And that's also from a Black artist. Those are lithographs from now that I know as well as I know from Chicago. She founded the African American Museum on the south side of Chicago. Lisa, help me with that name that I'm blanking on.
Margaret Burroughs.
Yes, thank you. I should remember my name. Yeah. Margaret Burroughs and I spent my first year in Chicago, or my second year. I worked at DuSable High School, and Margaret Burroughs was an art teacher at that particular year. She went on to found her own museum. And I have 8 lithographs that she did, all depicting African-American people, Harriet Tubman, you just name it. And the ones I have here, well, you can't really see it distinctly, but I'm so pleased to have those in my home. And I do enjoy art. I simply don't have the money to purchase what I would like to have in my home.
So we have a
This is,
few minutes
King.
left, but I see there's one hand, Salis Demling. Is that a question, or I see your family member, correct?
Yes, hi, it's Celise. And
Celise?
yeah, this question is for cousin Margaret.
Okay.
You had mentioned that the whole family was creative, like writers, artists, musicians. Is there anything else you could add to that? Do you think their parents actually encourage that? Because usually parents are afraid of that if you're going to be an artist. So
Yeah, from what I understand from Evelyn's writing, the sibling of Aunt Vivian, they were just the family that had that talent. The father, the mother, and especially the children. She tells the story of one of the sons, James Thomas. In his obituary, a woman wrote a piece describing his unique talent with music. She said they would sit spellbound with what he could do, how he composed it, what he did with it. And throughout the family, like the young woman you just heard, Miss Demling, her father's is a known historian. His mother, my aunt and Lisa's aunt, etc., is a poet in her own right, has published works. And so I suppose it missed me, but it ran through other parts of the family, this creative, artistic, and musical bent. But I enjoy music and I enjoy art, and there is nothing better than a book in the hand to just create a different set of ideas that you never thought about, but you learn through books or to travel to places, which brings me to the point that Aunt Vivian did do a lot of traveling with her husband, going to the Holy Lands and to Egypt, different places. So.
And I see a comment here from Spencer Johnson, great nephew. Could you let us see you and say hello and tell us about your connection?
I don't see that.
Are you
name.
on? Yeah, I saw you in the chat. So great.
Do you have a name?
Yes, ma'am. Hello, everybody. Hello, cousin.
Hello there,
About your connection.
Hi there, Spencer.
Hello. Can you hear
Good to hear
me?
your voice.
Oh,
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
We see you.
We can hear you. No, I had the privilege of growing up with her. Awesome, awesome experience.
And so how are you connected?
Great nephew. She brought my father up from Memphis in 1936 to get educated. And she set his age back a couple of years so he could get to her level of proficiency before she put him in Morgan. And he got drafted into World War II. He was on the football team. And when he came out, he finished Morgan in 1949. He was urged by Mr. Cook to give up his dreams of being a musician and become a chemist. And he was one of the first Black scientists, civilian scientists at what now is called Aberdeen Proving Ground, but at that time it was Edgewood Arsenal. And there was all this emphasis on education. And I've started a memorial at Morgan in my father's memory, a scholarship.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing. Tonight has
Cindy,
been fabulous. Janet?
I don't mean to interrupt. I know you're going to be running out of time very soon. I would just like to remind people that there is a link to a survey, and that you can answer some questions and tell us how you felt about the program. And we would really appreciate it if you would do that and give us your written feedback. And again, to all of you, I would just like to say thank you very much and have a pleasant evening.
Thanks for joining us. Is there anyone who'd like to? We have 7 minutes. There are some wonderful notices in the chat if people want to just take a look at other family members of Miss Vivian Cook and hearing a little bit about their background and their experience. So if you want to read through that, some wonderful, wonderful things here.
Well, the one question I had, will the recording be available on your social media outlets?
Yes, Jan, Epsilon, it goes up on Epsilon Omega's tech page. Is that correct? Their YouTube page?
Yes, you may post it on our YouTube page.
Great. So it will be posted there. We didn't start the recording before the documentary, so those two things will be posted separately. So I want to thank everyone that came out this evening and shared with us. It was incredible, as it always is, to hear, particularly from family members and people who have personal experiences like this man, things that we don't know anything about, like her connection to the art world, and to hear those kinds of things. And what a thrill to do it during Women's History Month. So I agree with Margaret, we're all making history and all the things we're doing, but it is an honor to be connected to an organization that was chartered by a woman like Vivian Cook Johnson. So again, thank you for joining us this evening, and thank you so much to the panelists for sharing everything you did. And please do fill out your post-survey link and tell us what you thought about the event. Jan, would you like to say anything else to close us out?
I think it's all been said, but I would like to thank everybody for spending part of your evening with us. This has been an engaging and informative presentation, at least for me, to learn more about our chapter member, our charter member, and the impact that she made throughout the city of Baltimore and everywhere that she went, the field of education, in the field of arts, the field of the sorority. So thank you so much for being a part of us. I'd like to thank our panelists for agreeing to come and family members for being here to support. So thank you so much. I look forward to seeing you at some of our other events.
And an extra shout out to Norma Scott, who's also a member of Epsilon Omega and had a lot to do with connecting me with the Joshua Johnson Council and beginning to dig up some of this wonderful history. So thank you very much, Norma.
I'd like to say one thing. Thank you for that. It was a pleasure to do that. My connection with Soror Cook was that my mother was an English teacher on her faculty at Dunbar Senior High for many years. And she probably, my mother never said this, but she probably influenced my mother to become an AKA. My mother went to Spelman where they did not have sororities in her day. And she joined Alpha Kappa Alpha during the time that she was working on the faculty of Dunbar Senior High School.
And thank you so much to the History Committee and all the members who have had a part in making this evening successful. Thank you so much for your hard work.
You're welcome.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great evening.
Great.
Good night, everyone.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Bye.
Have a good one. Good night. Thank you.